Captain Ethan Cole hadn't planned on crashing into a planet ruled by towering alien women. But then again, he never planned most things. His ship's NAV system had gone haywire, spiraling him straight into the forbidden lands of Zelvaria, a place where no man had ever set foot. Now, standing in a grand hall surrounded by 8-foot-tall silver-skinned women, all staring at him like he was an exotic, possibly dangerous creature, Ethan felt deeply, deeply judged. The tallest of them, the High Priestess Chara, lifted her chin. Her voice carried the weight of centuries. "You are human." Ethan scratched his head. "Guilty as charged." A ripple of nervous whispers spread through the assembly. Some women clutched their robes as if shielding themselves from an unseen force. The High Priestess inhaled sharply. "Your presence is a great danger to our people." Ethan blinked. "You mean the whole stranger from another world thing? Look, I can explain." "Silence!" Chara's voice cracked like a whip. "We have studied your kind. Your nature." She spat the word like venom. Asterisk asterisk. "Humans are creatures of chaos, ruled by impulses." Ethan had a sinking feeling she wasn't talking about his appetite for adventure. Another Zelvarian woman, her silver eyes burning with barely concealed horror, stepped forward. "It is written in our ancient texts. The fire of human passion cannot be contained." More gasps. A few women fanned themselves. Ethan lifted his hands. "All right, I don't know what kind of weird space myths you've heard, but I promise." Chara narrowed her eyes. "Your fire is dangerous. If left unchecked, it could spread, consume our people. You must be restrained." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "Whoa. Restraint? Let's pump the brakes here. I literally just crash-landed. How about hospitality? Tea?" A regal-looking Zelvarian stepped forward, her voice dripping with arrogance. "The sacred laws demand a trial. If he can resist our presence, it will prove his discipline." The silence that followed was deeply suspicious. Ethan frowned. "Define resist." Chara's gaze was unwavering. "You will live among us. If, by the end, no Zelvarian has succumbed, we will allow you to leave." Ethan ran a hand down his face. "You're seriously worried I'll seduce your whole species by accident?" The Queen's voice wavered. "It has happened before." His jaw dropped. "Wait. What?" Murmurs. Awkward shifting. One younger Zelvarian blushed so hard she had to excuse herself. Ethan sighed. "Okay. Fine. Let's play your game. I'll behave. But when I win, I get a damn meal. Deal?" Chara nodded. "Deal." As he was escorted from the hall, he caught snippets of whispered conversations. "He already speaks with such dominance. Did you see the way he moved? Unrestrained. His heat is affecting the air." Ethan rolled his eyes. This was going to be a long trial. Ethan sat in what could only be described as a scientific interrogation chamber, though it had far more silk drapes and incense burners than he was used to. Across from him sat Violana, a Zelvarian scholar who looked far too composed for someone about to conduct a so-called biological study. She adjusted her robes and exhaled slowly. "We will begin by testing your resilience." Ethan folded his arms. "Resilience? Lady, I've crash-landed, been threatened with restraint, and now I'm apparently being treated like an unexploded bomb. You'll have to be more specific." Violana ignored his sarcasm and lifted a crystal-like tablet. "The fire of human passion is said to be uncontrollable. We must test its limits." Ethan smirked. "Oh, this should be good." She nodded to an assistant, who brought forward a Zelvarian warrior, tall, toned, and looking extremely uncomfortable. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's happening?" Violana cleared her throat. "She will touch you. You will not react." He coughed. "You're kidding." The warrior steeled herself and extended a hand. It barely brushed his forearm before she gasped sharply and yanked her hand away like she'd touched molten lava. The scholars murmured in shock. One frantically scribbled notes. Violana's eyes widened. Incredible. He burns. Ethan groaned. I do not burn. The warrior, still staring at her hand, whispered. It was warm. Ethan threw up his hands. Of course it was warm. I'm alive. Violana tapped her chin. Perhaps prolonged exposure is necessary. Before Ethan could protest, another Zelvarian stepped forward, this time one of the younger scholars. She looked determined, but also deeply nervous. I volunteer for extended contact. Another round of murmurs. Ethan sighed. All right, let's get this over with. She sat across from him, took his hand, and visibly tensed. Ethan kept his face neutral. See? Nothing's happening. She swallowed hard. It's spreading. Ethan tilted his head. What's spreading? Her breathing hitched. The fire. The room became dead silent. Ethan looked around. Are you people serious right now? The young scholar ripped her hand away and stood so quickly she knocked over her chair. I need to meditate. She ran from the room. Violana exhaled slowly, nodding as if she just confirmed her worst fears. This is worse than we thought. Ethan dragged a hand down his face. I hate everything about this. Shara sat across from Ethan, her posture impossibly rigid, hands resting on her lap as if she were restraining herself from moving an inch more than necessary. The chamber was dimly lit, flickering torches casting shadows over the smooth stone walls. She exhaled, slow and measured. You are the first human to set foot on this planet, she said, voice cool, unwavering. I will determine whether your presence is truly disruptive or if my people have been overreacting. Ethan leaned back. So, you're the final boss of self-control? Her silver eyes narrowed. I have trained in the sacred arts of discipline since my first breath. No mere influence can waver my resolve. He smirked. No pressure, then. Silence stretched between them. Shara inhaled through her nose, then exhaled. This test is simple. We will sit in silence, and I will prove that the so-called fire of human passion is but myth. Ethan gave a casual shrug. All right. But I gotta say, I think your people are blowing this way out of proportion. A muscle in her jaw tensed. We shall see. The seconds ticked by. Ethan did nothing. Literally nothing. And yet. Shara shifted, ever so slightly, before regaining her stillness. Her gaze flicked toward him. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just sitting there, breathing, existing. But that existence was proving to be a problem. She frowned. Your aura is disruptive. Ethan raised an eyebrow. My what? She pressed her lips together. The heat. It is subtle, but it lingers. He couldn't help it, he laughed. Lady, I'm just sitting here. Her fingers curled in her lap. Yes. And yet. Ethan tilted his head. You all right? You look a little tense. Shara scoffed. I am merely. She cut herself off, exhaling sharply. Ethan leaned forward. Am I making you nervous? Her back stiffened. Do not be absurd. Another pause. A bead of sweat formed at her temple. She wiped it away, almost too quickly. Ethan smirked. I think you're sweating. Shara inhaled sharply, looking offended at the mere suggestion. That is not possible. Zelvarians do not. Another droplet appeared, betraying her. Ethan grinned. Huh. That's interesting. Shara's nostrils flared. This is irrelevant. Ethan sat back, arms crossed, clearly enjoying himself. Hey, no shame in admitting you're struggling a little. I am not struggling. Her words were clipped, forced. More silence. Then, she shifted again. Ethan caught it. You sure? Her fingers dug into the fabric of her robe. I have spent decades mastering control. I have withstood the most grueling trials of endurance. Your mere presence is nothing. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Because it looks like you're losing your cool. Shara's jaw clenched. This trial is flawed. Your energy is unnatural. Ethan chuckled. Or maybe, just maybe, Your people made up a bunch of rules they don't actually want to follow. Her breath hitched. The silence stretched dangerously thin. And then, a single sound. Soft. Almost imperceptible. A sigh. Not from him. From her. The weight of the moment was instant. The watching scholars gasped. One nearly dropped her tablet. Another looked away, scandalized. Shara realized her mistake a second too late. Her hands clenched at her sides. Her posture rigid. But the damage was done. Ethan, grinning like a man who had just won a bet he didn't know he'd made, let out a slow whistle. Looks like the fire's catching. Shara shot to her feet, eyes burning with equal parts fury and humiliation. This trial is concluded. Ethan smirked. Did I win? Her fists tightened. You are dismissed. She turned on her heel, stalking out of the chamber with the kind of speed that suggested if she stayed a second longer, she might completely abandon her sacred discipline. Ethan watched her go, stretching his arms behind his head. I'll take that as a yes. The tension in the Zelvarian capital had shifted. Ethan could feel it in the way they stared at him now, not with fear, but something else. Curiosity. Hesitation. A crack in the unshakable discipline they prided themselves on. He strolled through the temple corridors, pretending not to notice the way conversations halted as he passed. Whispers followed him. He survived the trial of restraint. The high priestess faltered. He is dangerous. Ziwiran, one of the warrior elites, blocked his path. Unlike the others, she didn't look unsettled. She looked determined. You. Her voice was sharp, but there was something underneath it. I request an audience. Ethan crossed his arms. That's funny. I thought I was on house arrest. Her silver gaze held steady. I will not ask twice. He sighed. All right. Lead the way. She brought him to an open courtyard under the twin moons. Unlike the others, she didn't keep her distance. She stepped closer than any Zelvarian had dared. I do not understand you, she said. Ethan grinned. Join the club. Her jaw tightened. You are human. You are not bound by our laws, yet you walk as if you belong here. And now, she hesitated, voice lowering, even the high priestess falters in your presence. Ethan shrugged. Not my fault your people treat emotions like a crime. She took a step forward. You mock us, but tell me, is it truly so terrible? To have control over oneself? He met her gaze. Control is fine. But what happens when you're not allowed to feel at all? Silence. Her fists clenched. We have kept our traditions for millennia. We were told that to surrender is to lose ourselves. Ethan tilted his head. And now? Her breath was shallow. Now I do not know if that is true. Another step. Close enough that he could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Close enough that she was breaking her own laws just by standing there. Ethan smirked. You sure you want to be seen with me? You know what they say about playing with fire. She didn't move. I think we were lied to. He arched a brow. Oh? A deep inhale. A decision made. I want to know. Ethan blinked. Know what? Her lips parted. What the fire feels like. He let that hang in the air for a second longer than necessary. Then, before he could respond, the courtyard doors burst open. Guards. Scholars. Shara. The high priestess looked from Ziwiran to Ethan, and in that moment, everything was clear. A law had been broken. A rule shattered. The whispers turned to uproar. The warrior elite has fallen. Ziwiran turned to the gathered crowd, unshaken. No. I have awakened. Gasps. Ethan ran a hand down his face. Oh boy. The queen herself arrived, the royal guards parting to let her through. She stood before them, gaze unreadable. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke. Perhaps we were mistaken. The entire court froze. Ethan arched a brow. Come again? She exhaled. The laws were meant to protect us. But if they are built on falsehoods, then what are we protecting? Shara's voice was sharp. Your Majesty, this is highly unwise. The Queen's gaze remained firm. Is it? Ziwiren, standing tall, lifted her chin. I felt no destruction. No loss of self. Only understanding. The court was in shambles. The council members looked on the verge of collapse. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I didn't plan on leading an alien revolution, but hey, first time for everything. The Queen's gaze settled on him. You are free to leave, Captain Cole. But tell me, if others wish to learn more of this fire, would you refuse them? Ethan sighed deeply. He could already hear the headlines. Zelveria's first ambassador of passion. What could possibly go wrong? With a smirk, he shrugged. Guess I could stick around a little longer.